Nobody at the Ferretti estate ever looked at her face. Hope Whitaker was 27, 3 years behind on everything she owed, and this was her 19th delivery of a 14-hour shift. She set the bag down on the step at 9 o'clock. That's when the glass came apart. 3 men came through the garden, and the lights died. And every rational thing in her said, walk, get to the car, lock the door, dial 911. Let rich men solve rich men's problems. She'd made it 7 steps toward the gate when she heard an older woman screaming inside that house. Her feet turned around before she'd decided anything at all. What happened over the next 4 minutes, none of those men could have explained afterward. She didn't fight like a fighter. She moved like somebody who knew exactly where a human body stops working. When it was over, she was kneeling on the kitchen floor with both hands pressed into the housekeeper's leg, counting a pulse out loud, steady as a metronome. Luca Ferretti watched all of it from the top of the stairs with blood running past his temple. 38 years old, head of the oldest family in New England, a man who hadn't raised his voice in 7 years. He came down and stood in front of her, because the 3 men on his floor all carried the same small mark on the inside of the forearm, and this delivery girl had just put all 3 of them down. "Roll up your sleeves," he said. She stepped back. Her hands closed around her cuffs, and she started shaking. And it wasn't fear of him. It was something older than that, and that's what made him lose it. "Take it off!" She pulled the sleeves up herself. There was no mark. There were only the scars, long, pale, surgical, running from both wrists to both elbows. And the most dangerous man in New England went down on his knees on his own kitchen floor, because he'd seen those scars somewhere before, and he was the only person alive who knew what they meant. If you believe a person's worth is decided by who they are when nobody's watching, hit that like button for us. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and subscribe so you don't miss a single story. Now let's get back to that kitchen floor in Newport, and to the question Luca Ferretti was about to ask her. Where did you get those scars? He was still on the kitchen floor, one hand braced against the tile, and the question came out before he had even managed to stand. Hope pulled both sleeves down, covering every inch of skin that had been seen. An armored vehicle rolled over in northeastern Syria. He waited. She said nothing more. That was the entire answer. Outside, the first siren swept around the coastal bend, washing red light across the shattered doorway. Teddy Falco stepped into the kitchen, saw his boss sitting on the floor, then immediately turned his face away as though he had just witnessed something he wasn't permitted to see. Newport police came in through the front door. 2 ambulances pulled into the driveway. Marta Kowalski was carried out first, and she reached one hand toward Hope as the stretcher rolled past. But Hope had already risen and stepped back to make room for the paramedics, exactly like someone accustomed to knowing she wasn't the most important person in the room. The 3 intruders were taken outside in handcuffs, all of them conscious. A detective named Reina Ortiz spent 40 minutes walking through the entire house and taking a statement from everyone present. When it was Hope's turn, she asked what Hope did for a living. Food delivery. She asked where Hope had learned to do what she had just done. Hope said she'd served in the army. Ortiz asked what field. Hope said medical. Ortiz studied her for a long moment, wrote something in her notebook, then looked up. "You need to understand something," she said. 3 armed men. You took down all 3. Nobody died, nobody was seriously injured, and 3 witnesses say you acted after they attacked first. Legally, you're on safe ground. Hope nodded. But you'll have to come back, maybe more than once. Don't leave the state until I call you. Hope nodded again. That was her entire reaction. Ortiz closed her notebook, and at that exact moment, Dominic Barone entered the kitchen, wearing the expression of a man who had just finished inspecting the damage downstairs. He was 56, his voice as gentle as if he were speaking inside a church, and he always let other people finish before he spoke. "Detective," he said, "I have one small concern, and I hope you won't take me for being rude." Ortiz waited. Barone turned toward Hope with a thin smile and absolute courtesy. 9 o'clock at night, side gate. A food delivery girl happens to be here at the exact minute 3 armed men storm into this house. And she happens to be the only person within a 2-mile radius who knows how to put all 3 of them down. He folded his hands together. "I'm not saying she's guilty. I'm only saying that if I were you, I'd find the timing of this coincidence almost too perfect to believe." No one in the kitchen spoke. Teddy looked down at the floor. Ortiz glanced toward Hope. Hope didn't argue, didn't defend herself, didn't even look at Barone. She simply stood there with both arms hanging at her sides, and there was something very strange in the way she stood. It was the posture of someone who had been accused before and had learned that reacting only made everything worse. It was that silence that made Luca Ferretti rise to his feet. He brushed off his hands, walked past Barone as though the man weren't there, and stopped in the middle of the kitchen. "Dominic." Barone turned, still smiling. "Yes, sir. She's a guest in my house tonight." His voice wasn't even slightly louder than it had been before, and that was precisely what made the entire room turn cold. No one touches her. No one follows her. No one mentions her name on any phone call. He looked directly into the eyes of the man who had served his family since his father's generation. "That's a promise. You know what I do with my promises." Barone lowered his head by the smallest degree. "Of course, sir." Ortiz didn't understand everything that had just unfolded in front of her, but she understood enough to put away her notebook and leave. By the time the last vehicle pulled out of the driveway, only 4 people remained in the house, along with a kitchen floor covered in broken glass. Luca turned to Hope. "There are 11 empty rooms upstairs. Pick whichever one you want. Tomorrow morning, I'll have someone drive you home." Hope shook her head. "Thank you. I sleep in my car." He frowned. "It's going to rain." "I know." He waited for her to say something else, some reason, some polite refusal accompanied by an explanation. The kind of thing anyone else would have offered when turning down a man like him. Nothing came. She picked up her empty, insulated delivery bag from the counter, gave Teddy a small nod, then walked out the door. Luca stood watching her through the shattered doorway. Her car was parked at the far end of the driveway beneath the trees, about 30 yards from the side gate. The taillights came on once, then went dark. She didn't start the engine. She didn't go anywhere. She simply remained sitting in her car at the end of the driveway of a mansion that had just been attacked, in the middle of the night, because she had nowhere else to go. Barone stood beside him and said quietly, "You should let me check her out." Luca didn't take his eyes off the car. "You heard what I just said." "I heard you." "Then go to bed." Barone left the room. Teddy began sweeping up the glass, and Luca remained where he was, staring out toward the trees, trying to remember where he had seen scars like those before, in which photograph, tucked inside which file, and why the mere thought of it was enough to tighten something deep inside his chest. He wouldn't sleep that night, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, when he finally remembered, he would walk 30 yards down the driveway through the rain to ask her one single question. By 4 o'clock in the morning, the rain had been falling for a while. Luca walked down the driveway without an umbrella and without anyone beside him. Teddy followed 10 paces behind because he didn't dare let Luca go outside alone, and Barone followed Teddy because he had never allowed anything to happen in this house without being present for it. Luca knocked on the car window. Hope woke immediately. She didn't startle. She simply opened her eyes and sat upright like someone accustomed to sleeping in a position that allowed her to wake ready. She lowered the window. He stood there in the rain and asked, "Do you remember anyone named Elias?" She didn't answer at once. She looked at him for a moment, and in that instant something changed in her face. It wasn't shock. It was the slow recognition of someone who had just heard a name she had carried with her for 3 years without anyone ever asking about it. She said, "Give me a moment." Then she reached toward the back seat. She took out a small notebook with a military green canvas, cover worn nearly white at all 4 corners, its page edges curled from damp, with a rubber band wrapped around it to keep it from falling open. She slipped off the rubber band, opened the car door, and stepped out into the rain so she could stand level with him. She began turning the pages. She didn't search for an index. She didn't scan page by page. She went directly to page 19, like someone who knew exactly where it was. Then she tilted the notebook toward the gate light and read the entry word for word, without adding anything of her own. Sergeant Elias Ferretti, 24 years old, 14 minutes. He asked me 3 times whether his brother had eaten dinner. Last words, "Did my brother eat dinner?" Rain fell onto the paper. Hope covered it with her hand by instinct. Luca said nothing. He didn't move. Teddy stood frozen 10 paces away and barely dared to breathe. Barone stood behind Teddy with his hands folded in front of his stomach, and he was the only one of the 4 whose expression hadn't changed. Then Luca held out his hand. He didn't grab for the notebook. He simply extended his hand, palm up, like a man asking permission. Hope placed it in his hand. He lowered his eyes to the page. The handwriting was small, written in ballpoint ink, slanting to the right, blurred in places from having been wet a long time ago. Not from tonight. Beneath the line she had just read was one more sentence she hadn't spoken aloud, and he read it silently. "He called me Hope. He said that name sounded beautiful in a place like this." Luca looked up. "Hope." She nodded. "That's your name." "Yes." He looked back at the notebook. He turned back one page. Page 18 held another name, another age, another number of minutes, another final sentence. He turned another page. Page 17 was the same. He continued backward, and every page was full, all in the same handwriting, all following the same pattern, until he reached a blank page. He counted back. Then he asked, and his voice was so quiet Teddy had to watch his mouth to know what he had said. "How many people?" 31. Luca closed the notebook. He wrapped the rubber band back into its exact old position, carefully, as though he were performing something extraordinarily difficult, then returned the notebook to her with both hands. Hope took it. He remained standing in the rain. Water ran down beside the wound at his temple, and he didn't lift a hand to wipe it away. He said, 3 years ago, they gave me a file this thick." He held up 2 fingers about half an inch apart. There were maps in it, technical reports, unit names, incident codes. There wasn't a single line telling me what my brother said. Hope didn't answer. 3 years, he said. "I've read that file no fewer than 200 times. She still didn't answer. She simply stood there in the rain with the notebook held against her chest, and the only thing she did was refuse to look away. Luca stepped back once. He turned toward Teddy. "Take her inside." Hope opened her mouth to speak. He spoke first. "Not the guest room. Any room. She chooses." Then he added, and this time his voice had returned to what it always was, even, low, impossible to argue with. "She doesn't sleep in that car again. Not tonight. Not any other night, as long as she's on my property." Teddy nodded and came forward. Hope looked at him, then at the notebook in her hands. Then she nodded once and followed Teddy toward the house. Barone didn't move. He waited until the other 2 were nearly 50 feet away before speaking, very softly and very politely. "Sir, may I say one thing?" Luca didn't turn around. "No." Barone lowered his head. "Yes, sir." Then he left as well. Alone in the rain, Luca Ferretti stood watching the small figure climb the front steps with the notebook pressed against her chest, and there was only one thought in his mind, repeating over and over like a nail being driven into wood. This woman had been beside his younger brother for the final 14 minutes of his life. She had written down every word he said. She had carried those words with her for 3 years in a car she now had to sleep in. And tonight, she had come to his house to deliver a bag of dinner worth $42. By 6 o'clock in the morning, the rain had stopped, and Teddy Falco walked down to the end of the driveway to bring Hope's car into the courtyard. He wasn't planning to search it. He only meant to move it away from where it was parked near the side gate, because the police had said they might come back to take measurements. But when he sat down behind the wheel, he couldn't find anywhere to put his feet, and when he turned around, he understood why. The back seat had been folded flat. On top of it was a thin folding mattress, a pillow, and a wool blanket folded into a precise 90-degree corner, the kind of fold only someone who had lived in barracks would make. Beside the mattress sat a clear plastic storage bin with a locking lid. Teddy remained still for several seconds. Then he opened it. He wasn't a curious man, but he was Luca Ferretti's man. And in this house, anyone who slept under the roof had to be known. That rule had existed long before Teddy ever came to work there. Inside the bin, documents were arranged in separate stacks, each one held together with a paper clip. He picked up the stack on top. It was a collection notice from a hospital in Providence, with a bold warning that the account would be turned over to a collection agency, and the amount listed at the bottom was $61,218. He kept going. There were 3 employment rejection letters, all 3 from emergency medical units, and all 3 contained the exact same sentence in the middle paragraph, stating that the applicant didn't meet the requirements for a current professional license. At the bottom of the bin, inside a separate plastic sleeve, was a large sheet of ivory-colored paper. Teddy had seen that kind of document only once in his life, when his father died and a copy had been sent home. He pulled it out. Half an hour later, in the kitchen, when Luca came downstairs, Teddy had already laid the document on the stone countertop. Hope stood in the kitchen doorway. She had seen the plastic bin on the counter from the hallway. She didn't come forward. She didn't ask who had given them permission to go through her things. She simply stood there with her arms at her sides and waited. That bothered Teddy more than anything he had just read. He wanted her to get angry. He wanted her to snatch the bin away, wanted her to curse at him, anything that would give him a reason to believe he had been right. She gave him no such reason. Luca looked at the document on the counter. "What's this?" Teddy said. "Her discharge papers. I found them in the car." Then he read them aloud because Luca didn't pick them up. He read the name, the unit, the length of service, 6 years, and when he reached the line describing the character of discharge, he paused for a beat before continuing. Character of service. General. Under honorable conditions. He glanced up. Luca didn't react. Teddy read the final line, the one stating the reason. Misconduct. Suspected loss of controlled narcotics from the battalion pharmacy. No one in the kitchen said anything. Barone was standing beside the coffee pot, and he filled his cup before speaking, his voice as smooth as ever. "So we have someone the army once suspected of stealing morphine sleeping at the end of your driveway on the very night your house was attacked." He set the coffee pot down. "I'm only stating the facts, sir. I'm not drawing any conclusions." Luca kept looking at the paper. Without turning around, he asked Hope, "Did you take it?" Hope said, "No." "Do you have anything that proves you didn't?" "No." That was all. She didn't say, "I appealed, I tried, I filed paperwork, I have witnesses." She didn't say a single word in her own defense. Teddy looked at her and felt something that was very close to anger. And it would be many months before he understood that it wasn't anger at all. At that exact moment, a voice called from the room in the back, where Marta Kowalski had been settled after refusing to stay at the hospital overnight. "Teddy Falco." He turned. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried far enough for everyone in the kitchen to hear. "What was that you were reading so loudly?" Teddy walked to the doorway. Marta lay there with her leg heavily bandaged, and she looked past his shoulder into the kitchen, directly at Hope. Then she said, "I don't know what that paper says. I only know one thing." She raised one finger. "That girl kept pressure on my leg for 11 minutes. I counted. I counted because I thought I was going to die, and I wanted to know how much time I had left." She lowered her hand. "No one in this house knew where I was lying at the time. No one." Barone quietly set his coffee cup down on the stone counter. Luca picked up the document, folded it carefully along its old creases, and held it out toward Hope. "Yours." She took it. Without looking at anyone, he said to Teddy, "Put everything back in the bin. Return it to the car, in exactly the same order you took it out." Then he walked out of the kitchen. But before he reached the hallway, he stopped and asked a question. Neither Teddy nor Barone understood why he would ask at that moment. "Last night's order," he said. "Who placed it?" No one answered him right away. Teddy said he didn't know, that he wasn't responsible for anything involving the kitchen. Barone said he didn't know either, and that it was the kind of question no one usually needed to ask. Luca turned back into the kitchen and sat down in the chair across from Hope. "Do you still have the order?" She took out her phone. There was a crack running diagonally across the upper corner of the screen, and she had to tap twice before the app would open. She handed the phone to him. He read it. The order had been placed at 8:47 that evening. 4 meals from an Italian restaurant on Thames Street, totaling $42.15. The recipient name was listed as L. Ferretti. The delivery address was clearly written in all capital letters, East Side Gate, with an additional note beneath it. "Don't ring the main gate bell. Use the side entrance." Luca read that line 3 times. Then he called for Marta. Teddy wheeled her in on a chair with casters. Luca asked whether she'd ordered dinner for him the night before. She said no. He asked whether she'd ever ordered food to be delivered to this house. She said that in 19 years of working there as housekeeper, she'd never done it once, because the chef was always on duty until 11 o'clock at night, and because the former owner had forbidden deliveries like that a long time ago. Luca asked whether the chef had been there the night before. She said yes. He asked who in the house knew there was a side gate on the east end of the property. Marta looked at him for a moment, then said, "Mr. Luca, that gate isn't even shown on delivery maps. It has no street number. It has no mailbox. Even the mail carrier doesn't know it exists." He placed Hope's phone on the stone counter, the screen still glowing. Then he called Teddy back over. "Call the restaurant," Teddy called. The restaurant still had the receipt. The evening manager read it back to him. The order had been placed through the app. The contact number had a 401 area code. Payment hadn't been made with a credit card, but with a prepaid gift card. There was no loyalty account and no previous order history. Teddy asked one more question, and the manager confirmed it. This was the first and only order ever placed from that phone number. Luca picked up his own phone and dialed the 401 number. He put it on speaker. It rang twice, then switched to an automated voice saying that the subscriber hadn't activated voicemail. He hung up. He called again. Same thing. He set the phone down. There were 4 people in the kitchen then, and no one said a word. Teddy opened the refrigerator and closed it again without taking anything out, simply because he didn't know what to do with his hands. Barone leaned against the edge of the counter, still holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, his eyes never leaving Luca. Luca sat perfectly still. He looked down at the stone countertop, where 3 things lay side by side: Hope's cracked phone, his own phone, and the folded discharge document. He stared at them for a long time, long enough that Teddy began to feel uneasy and moved over to the window. Long enough that Marta softly said Luca's name once and he didn't hear her. Then he spoke, his voice even, almost as though he were talking to himself. 4 meals. No one understood. He continued. Someone ordered 4 meals. Last night there was me, Marta, the chef, 2 men at the main gate, and 4 people in the side quarters. 9 people. If someone had actually wanted to order dinner for this house, it would have been 9 meals. He looked up. 4 meals is what someone orders when they want the delivery to look real, but they've never eaten dinner in this house, Barone said very quietly. Or it's what someone puts down at random just to finish the order. Maybe. Luca stood. He walked to the window where Teddy was standing and looked out over the east courtyard, where a narrow stone path led down toward the side gate hidden behind the trees. Teddy. Yes. What locks that gate? Electronic lock. Keypad code. It keeps a log. Who has the code? Teddy paused for a beat. Me, you, security, and the office. Luca didn't ask who in the office. He didn't ask anything else. He simply stood there looking out at the stone path, and after a while he said to Teddy, very quietly, "Get me the gate log. Don't tell anyone I asked you for it." Teddy nodded and left. Barone washed his coffee cup under the faucet, dried it with a towel, placed it upside down on the rack, then said, "Sir, I'll have someone inspect the entire perimeter wall this morning." "Good. And I haven't changed my opinion about Miss Whitaker." "I know." Barone lowered his head and walked out. That left Luca standing by the window and Hope sitting at the table, and she was the one who spoke first. For the first time that entire morning, she volunteered a sentence that wasn't an answer to someone else's question. "What are you thinking?" Luca didn't turn around. "I'm thinking about something very simple," he said. "You didn't choose that gate. The order chose it." He was silent for a moment. "And if you hadn't shown up last night, then at 9 o'clock, that gate still would have needed to open for some reason." He turned and looked at her. "You weren't the person they called to deliver dinner. You were the excuse they needed to get that gate opened." By that afternoon, Barone came back, and he brought a thin stack of papers with him and set it down on the desk in the study. "Sir, I'd like permission to revisit what I said this morning. This time, I have documentation." Luca didn't touch the papers. "Go ahead. I had someone look into Miss Whitaker's account. Not to make things difficult for her. To rule her out." He turned to the first page. 4 days before the night before last, $40,000 was transferred into an account under the name Hope Whitaker at a bank in Providence. The sender was a consulting company registered in Delaware, formed 7 months ago, with no employees and no office. He turned to the second page. That company shares a registered agent address with 2 other companies. Both of them received money from Declan Ward. Luca looked at the page. "You're sure about that last name? I checked it 3 times before I brought this up here." Luca called Teddy. 10 minutes later, Hope was brought into the study. Barone read through everything again, slowly, without emphasizing a single word, exactly the way a man might read a weather report. Then he asked, "Would you like to explain?" Hope said, "I've never seen $40,000 in my life. That's not an explanation." "I know." Barone folded the papers closed. He looked at Luca. Luca studied Hope for a long moment, then said to Teddy, "Take her downstairs. Get to the bottom of it." Then he added, and he said this after turning his face away, "What I said the night before last still stands. You understand?" Teddy said, "I understand." The wine cellar was below the ground floor, with stone walls, a long wooden table, and 2 chairs. Teddy pulled one chair out for her. He sat across from her. He placed the stack of papers between them. Then he began, and for 2 straight hours he kept asking questions. When did you open that account? 2017. While I was still in the service. Who knows your account number? The hospital, the collection agency. The delivery platforms deposit my pay into it. Do you check the balance? Yes. How often? Every night. Teddy stopped. Every night. Yes. Then if $40,000 went into your account 4 days ago, you had to have seen it. I did. He looked up. You saw it? Yes. And you didn't say anything? I called the bank that same day. What did you tell them? I told them money had gone into my account, and I didn't know where it came from, and that I wanted to return it. Teddy looked at her. Then what? They said they had to open an investigation case, and that it would take 10 to 15 business days. They gave me a case number. Do you have that number? Yes. In a text message. She slid her phone across the table. Teddy read it. He read it carefully, read it again, then set the phone down and sat there in silence for a while. Did you withdraw any of it? No. Not a single dollar? No. You owe $61,000. You're sleeping in your car. And $40,000 has been sitting in your account for 4 days, and you haven't touched it. Yes. Why? Hope said. Because it isn't mine, Teddy continued. He asked how many delivery platforms she worked for, asked about her route that night, asked where she'd delivered the 18 orders before that one, asked the time of every delivery. She answered everything without getting a single detail wrong, and every answer could be verified through the app. He asked whether she knew anyone named Declan Ward. She said no. He asked whether she'd ever been to Fall River. She said she'd made food deliveries there twice in the previous month. He asked who they were for. She said she didn't remember the customers' names because the app only showed their last names. He asked whether she remembered their faces. She said no, because she'd left the food at the door and walked away. Nearly 2 hours in, Teddy pushed the stack of papers toward her. You understand what this looks like, don't you? I understand. Then say something. I've told you everything I know. No, I'm not asking what you know. I'm asking what you have that I can take back upstairs. He pointed toward the ceiling. You served in the military. You did something 3 armed men couldn't do. Why don't you tell him? Why don't you tell him where you've been, what you've done, how many people you've saved? 1 sentence. That's all it would take for him to see you differently. Hope sat quietly. Then she said, If I have to drag Syria into this to prove I didn't steal, then I've already lost. Teddy didn't answer. 3 years ago, she continued, they put a stack of papers like this in front of me too. Everything on them lined up. I sat at a table just like this one and said exactly what I just said to you. Nobody believed me. Then they sent me home. She looked down at the papers. That doesn't change because I tell more stories about the past. It only changes with documentation. Teddy gathered up the papers and stood. He opened the wine cellar door and let her walk out first. And as she passed him, he realized something that would bother him for the rest of that evening. In the 2 hours they'd just spent down there, not once had she asked him whether she was free to go. By the 3rd day, the military file arrived at the house. Luca had people who knew how to make things like that happen, and it took one of them only 2 days, and an insignificant amount of money, to obtain a complete copy of the internal investigation file concerning Private First Class Hope Whitaker, battalion medic. He carried it into the study, closed the door, and sat reading from 9 o'clock in the morning until nearly 4 in the afternoon. He wasn't a man with much formal education. He dropped out of college at 21 when his father became ill, but he'd spent 17 years reading the books of people who wanted to cheat him, and he knew what an honest record looked like. There were always imperfections, always a misspelled name, a timestamp off by a few minutes, a page that had been retyped. When human beings did the work, they left marks behind. This file didn't have a single one. The battalion pharmacy's controlled narcotics dispensing log carried her signature on 17 entries over a 6-week period. He compared every signature with the one on her discharge papers. They matched. He compared them with signatures on other documents in the file. They still matched. The medication cabinet access code was personal, assigned separately to each individual, and the electronic log showed her code opening the cabinet on 3 different nights, each one 9 days apart. The quantity reported missing matched the discrepancy in the inventory exactly. Her duty shifts matched. Everyone else's duty schedules matched too, and on all 3 nights, no one else had been present in the pharmacy. At that point, Luca stopped and sat there for a very long time. He read the entire thing again from the beginning. He looked for what he always looked for, when someone brought him a set of records that was too clean. He couldn't find it. That afternoon, he called Teddy in. "Read this." Teddy read for 40 minutes. When he looked up, his face had changed completely. "This." He didn't finish the sentence. Luca said, "Say it." "If I were the one judging the case," Teddy said slowly, "I'd reach the same conclusion they did. You questioned her for 2 hours. What do you think?" "I think she didn't lie to me once." He pointed at the file. "But this says the opposite." Luca closed the file and rested one hand on top of it. "Do you know what bothers me?" "No. In my life there have been 4 people who truly wanted me dead. 4. I know all 4 of their names. I know where they sleep. I know which lawyers they use." He tapped the cover of the file twice. Not one of those 4 could build paperwork like this. Teddy was silent. "Whoever put this together," Luca said, "knew exactly what a military board would ask and answered every question before they had the chance to ask it. That person wasn't in a hurry. They spent 6 weeks doing something that, if they'd rushed, could have been done in 1 night." He pushed the file aside. "It doesn't look like theft. It looks like construction." Teddy asked, "So you believe her?" Luca didn't answer that. He stood, walked to the window, and said, "She stays. No one touches her. That doesn't change. Even if this file is true, I gave my word before I knew who she was," Luca said. "If my word only means something when it's convenient for me, then it was never a promise at all." Teddy left. In the back room, Marta Kowalski was able to sit up now. She still couldn't walk, but she'd demanded her phone back the day before, and for the past 2 days she'd been lying there making calls. She called her daughter in Warwick. She called an old friend who had once been a head nurse at a veterans hospital. She called a friend of that friend. That afternoon she had Teddy wheel her into the hallway, and when Luca passed by, she raised a sheet of paper covered in a few lines of crooked handwriting. "Mr. Luca." He stopped. "I found a place." He took the paper. It was the name of a non-profit legal aid organization in Providence that specialized in veterans' cases, and beneath it was a woman's name and phone number. "They say this woman has been doing this kind of work for 30 years, Marta said. "They say she doesn't take cases she thinks she'll lose." Luca looked at the paper. "Have you called them yet?" "I did. I said there was a girl who needed help. I didn't tell them where she was, and I didn't mention your name." She looked at him. "Don't tell that woman your name, Mr. Luca. She'll hang up." Luca folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He stood there for another moment, and Marta noticed that he was holding the paper in a way she'd never seen in all her years working in that house, like a man who had just been handed something he wasn't certain he had the right to use. Then he said, "Call her again. Tell her to come. Come here. Come here. What are you going to tell her about who you are?" Luca said, "I'll tell her I'm the one paying." Marta shook her head. "Then she'll turn around and leave at the door." Helen Marsh arrived at 9 o'clock the next morning in a car that already had 200,000 miles on it, and she didn't turn around at the door. She was 54 years old, carrying a leather briefcase with the corners peeling, and the first thing she did when she stepped into the study was look around once and say, "I know this house. I grew up 8 miles from here." Luca invited her to sit. She sat down. He said, "You know who I am, don't you?" "I know who you are, and you still came in." "I didn't come because of you," Helen said. "The person who called me was a housekeeper with an injured leg, and she said there was a young woman who needed help. I came because of her. If she isn't here, I'll leave right now." Hope was called in. Helen shook her hand, asked her several questions about her unit, the year she was discharged, and the character of service listed on her paperwork. Then she opened her briefcase and took out a notebook. She said, "Listen carefully. I'm only going to say this once. There's a board called the Army Discharge Review Board. Their job is to reconsider the character of your discharge and the reason listed on your paperwork. If they agree with you, they'll correct it, and that correction becomes effective retroactively to the day you left the service. The old paper is treated as though it never existed." Hope said nothing. Helen continued, "But there's something you need to understand. That board doesn't retry your case. They don't call witnesses, they don't investigate, and they don't go looking for anyone. They only read the record that already exists, along with whatever you submit." She looked directly at Hope. "So if you file an application with nothing but your own word, They'll read the old finding, see that it lines up from beginning to end, and deny you in 3 minutes. Not because they're cruel, because they have nothing else to read. The room was quiet for a while. Then Luca said, "So what do you need to do this?" Helen turned toward him. "New evidence. Something that wasn't in the file 3 years ago. Just tell me. How much?" "You didn't hear what I said." "I heard you. I'm asking how much." Helen closed her notebook. "Mr. Ferretti, I've been doing this for 30 years. In those 30 years, I've met plenty of people with more money than you." She rested one hand on her leather briefcase. "That board is made up of 3 active duty officers sitting in a room in Virginia, and they'll read Miss Whitaker's file along with 20 other files that morning. They don't know who you are. They don't care who you are. You don't have anything they want, and you don't have anything you can threaten them with." She said the final sentence very slowly. "You can't buy this outcome. All you can do is find the truth and put it in front of them." Luca sat still. It had been a very long time since anyone had spoken to him that way inside his own house. And the strange thing was that he didn't feel insulted. He felt something else. Something almost like relief. He said, "Then I'll pay you to do the work. I don't take money from Miss Whitaker because she doesn't have any, and I don't take money from you because I don't want your name anywhere in my files. My organization is funded. It's been that way for 30 years. She turned toward Hope. "You've heard me. Now I'm going to ask you one question, and I need an honest answer. Do you want a file?" Hope said, "No." Everyone in the room turned to look at her. Helen didn't seem surprised. She only asked, "Why?" "Because I don't have new evidence. You just said so." "That's true, but you've never filed before either. I checked before I came. Your record has never been reviewed." Hope looked down at her hands. "I wrote an application," she said. "The first year. I wrote it twice. The first time it was 11 pages. The second time I rewrote it and cut it down to 3 because I thought people might actually read it if it was shorter." She paused. "I never sent either one." "Why?" "Because I already sat in front of a board once, 3 years ago, and I told them everything I knew." She looked up. "If I send that application and they deny it in 3 minutes, then this is really over. Right now, it isn't over. Right now, it's just hanging there." Helen nodded slowly. She had heard that before, more than once, and she knew better than to answer it with encouragement. She took a business card from her briefcase and placed it on the table in front of Hope. "I'm not going to pressure you, but I will tell you one thing. That record isn't sitting still. It's following you every time you apply for a job, every time you try to get your license reinstated, every time someone looks up your name." She closed her briefcase and stood. At the door, she turned back and said one last thing to Luca. "If you really want to help her, don't go looking for people you know. Go looking for paperwork. Find out who signed, who opened the cabinet, who was on duty that night. Bring me that, and I can do something with it." Then she left. Luca remained alone in the study, and he realized that for the first time in 17 years, there was a door that his money, his name, and every person he had couldn't open. That evening, Luca had her called up to the library. It was a long room, and he sat at one end beside the unlit fireplace while she sat at the other, near the door, in the first chair she'd seen when she walked in. Neither of them suggested that the other move any closer. On the small table beside him was a sheet of paper. He didn't hand it to her. He only said, $61,218. Hope didn't answer. "I had someone call the hospital this afternoon. We didn't give them your name. We only asked whether they'd reduce the amount for a single payment. They said yes, but I'm not going to negotiate. I'll pay the full amount, including whatever the collection agency added, and I'll require written confirmation that the balance has been paid in full within 7 business days." He looked at her across the length of the room. "By tomorrow morning, it'll be done." Hope sat quietly for a long time. Then she asked, "Why?" "Because I have money and you don't. And because you sat with my brother for 14 minutes in a place where no one wanted to stay." He said it calmly, as though reading out an item on a ledger. "Those are 2 reasons. You don't need a third." Hope looked down at her hands. Then she said, "No." His expression didn't change. He simply waited. "If you pay $61,000, she said, "then tomorrow I'll be out of debt. But the paper in my car will still say exactly what it says today. I'll still be the woman who stole morphine, except I won't owe money anymore." She looked up. "I still won't be able to get a job in the field. I still won't get my license back. Those 3 rejection letters will still be followed by a 4th and a 5th. Your money can't touch that part. Luca said nothing. And there's one more thing, Hope said. If you pay it, then starting tomorrow, I'll owe you. You'll say I don't, but I'll know I do. Then someday, when you tell me to do something, I won't know whether I'm doing it because I believe it's right or because I owe you $61,000. She was quiet for a moment. I've spent the last 3 years owing no one anything except that hospital bill. I'd like to keep it that way. The only sound in the room was the clock on the mantel. Luca sat perfectly still. He was accustomed to people taking what he offered, and he was also accustomed to people refusing because they were afraid. This was the first time anyone had refused him for a reason he couldn't argue against. He remained silent so long that Hope thought the conversation was over and started to rise. Then he said, I understand. He picked up the paper from the small table, folded it in half, and placed it face down. Then I'll get your name back. Hope looked at him. You can't. Miss Marsh already said that. She said I can't buy it. She didn't say no one can get it back. He stood and walked to the window, but he didn't move even one step closer to her. She said to find the paperwork. Find out who signed, who opened the cabinet, who was on duty. I can do that. Not with money. With time and people. Hope said, You don't owe me this. No. Then why are you doing it? Luca turned and looked at her across the length of the room. Do you know what the most expensive thing in this house is? She shook her head. It isn't the paintings in the hallway. In the work I do, people don't sign contracts. They can't go to court. The only thing holding everything together is that when I say something, it's true. Even when it hurts me. Even when I've changed my mind. Even when the person hearing it has no way to force me to keep my word. He said the final sentence very quietly. I just gave you my word. So this is settled now, whether you want it to be or not. Hope didn't answer. She sat there, with both hands resting in her lap, and after a while she said, You know this could take years, don't you? I know, and we might not find anything at all. I know, she nodded once. Then she said, and for the first time in 4 days there was something in her voice that didn't sound like endurance. Then I have one condition. He waited. I'm not sitting around in this house doing nothing. I'm still working the night shift. No, I'm not asking your permission, Hope said. I'm telling you. I have parking fees, gas, and a phone bill. I'm not taking your money, and I'm not planning to let you support me. Luca started to say something else. Then he stopped. He looked at her for a moment and realized that even if they argued for another 2 hours, she would still walk out through the gate at 7 o'clock that evening, just as she always did. Then Teddy goes with you. I don't need him. That's not something you get to tell me either, he replied. For the first time in 4 days, something very close to a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and it vanished so quickly he wasn't sure he'd seen it at all. The next morning, as Hope was crossing the foyer, she stopped at the front door and looked out toward the main gate. Luca was standing there with a cup of coffee in his hand. Without turning around, she said, Has that mailbox out there been there a long time? Since my grandfather's time. Do you still use it? We do. Mail, bills, miscellaneous things. Hope nodded. Then she said, I once put a letter in there. Luca set his coffee down. Say that again. September, 3 years ago. I'd been back in the country for 4 months. I drove down here from Providence. I came 3 times. She was still looking toward the gate. The first 2 times, I sat in my car out on the road and then drove home. The 3rd time, I got out and put it in the box. Who was it addressed to? You. I wrote your name on the envelope. I wrote that it was for Sergeant Ferretti's brother. Luca stood perfectly still. I didn't have your home address, she said. All I had was the first and last name in my notebook. I searched online and found this estate. I wasn't sure it was the right house, but I figured if I was wrong, it would only be 1 lost letter. She turned to look at him. You never got it, did you? Luca didn't answer. He walked out to the gate. He lifted the lid of the tarnished brass mailbox, looked inside, then closed it again. He stood there for a very long time. At noon that day, in the study, he asked Marta who collected the mail from that box. She said that for 19 years, the morning gate guard had always brought it in and placed it on a tray in the foyer. He asked who sorted it after that. Marta paused for a beat, then said, The office, Mr. Luca. Anything that isn't a bill goes upstairs to the office. He asked how long that had been the procedure. She said since his father was alive. Just then, Barone knocked and entered, carrying another file, and he apologized for bringing bad news. "Sir, about the cameras." Luca looked up. "What about them?" 3 recordings from that night are unusable. The side gate, the east courtyard, and the kitchen corridor. I've had 2 technicians looking at them since yesterday morning. They say the files were corrupted during recording and can't be recovered. He placed the file on the desk. "I'm very sorry. I know those were the 3 you needed." "Which 2 technicians?" "From the same company that installed our system last year. I have their written report here." Luca picked up the report, read it, then set it down. "All right, thank you." Barone lowered his head and left. When the door closed, Luca called Teddy in and said only one sentence. "You know where the server is, don't you?" That evening, Teddy returned to the study with a printed sheet of paper. He remained standing instead of sitting. "Hear me all the way through before you ask anything," he said. "I don't know much about computers, but even a child could read this." He placed the paper on the desk. "Our camera system records the footage, then sends the files to the server here in the house. Every time it sends one, the system logs a line showing the time, the file, and whether the transfer succeeded or failed." He pointed to 3 lines circled in pencil. "These are the 3 files from that night. All 3 say successful. There isn't a single failure notice." Luca looked at the page. If the files had been corrupted during recording, it would have shown up here. "Exactly. It should have. It didn't." Teddy pointed farther down. "Then there's this. 4 hours after those 3 files reached the server, someone changed the status of all 3 to quarantine for technical review. That status means the files are still sitting there intact, but no one can open them until someone approves access. So they're still there? They're there, intact. Sitting on a machine less than 40 yards from us." Luca placed one finger on the final line of the printout. In the boxes for requested by and approved by, the same name appeared. "You're sure about this?" "I printed 3 copies. One of them is in the safe at my house." Luca sat there for a long time. He didn't strike the desk, didn't stand up, didn't call anyone. He simply remained seated with both hands resting on the tabletop while Teddy waited. And after a while, Teddy said, "Just let me go downstairs and ask him one question." "No." "Luca." "No." Luca looked up. "You ask one question, and 2 hours from now, those 3 files really will be corrupted. And this time, there'll be a report from the technical company proving they were damaged from the beginning." Teddy fell silent. "You don't say anything to anyone," Luca said. "You behave exactly the way you did yesterday. You greet him in the hallway. You still take whatever work he gives you. Then what? Then you find me 2 more things. The side gate access log from that night, and a list of everything that passed through the office in September 3 years ago." Teddy frowned. "What does September 3 years ago have to do with this?" Luca picked up the printout and folded it. "A girl drove down here from Providence 3 times to put a letter in my mailbox," he said. "I never received it. 3 camera files are sitting on the server, but no one is allowed to open them." He looked at Teddy. "Do you see what those 2 things have in common?" Teddy answered slowly. "Someone is standing in the middle." "For 3 years," Luca said, "and I've been sitting inside this house reading exactly what someone decided to put in front of me." At 7 o'clock Friday evening, Hope went out through the gate as usual. Teddy followed in his own car, keeping about 330 yards behind her, exactly as Luca had instructed. She knew he was there. She didn't say anything about it. By 9:30, she picked up an order in North Providence, finished the delivery, then pulled into the parking lot of a supermarket that stayed open 24 hours so she could use the restroom and buy a bottle of water. Teddy parked 2 rows away, and he made the only mistake he would make that entire evening. He looked down at his phone to answer a message. When he looked up, a pickup truck had parked across the back of her car, blocking her in, and 2 men were standing on either side of her. The first blocked the driver's door. The second stood at an angle just behind her shoulder. Hope didn't turn around. She looked into the car window in front of her and counted both men in the reflection. The first man said Mr. Ward wanted to speak with her. She said she didn't know anyone by that name. He said that made things easier. She asked where he wanted her to go. He pointed toward the pickup, and while he was pointing, she already knew exactly how many seconds she had. What happened next was very fast and almost completely silent. The second man touched her shoulder first, and that was where he gave away his center of gravity. She dropped low, used the partly open car door as leverage, and he lost his balance straight into his own pickup truck. The first man reacted with whatever he'd already been holding inside his sleeve. She blocked it, but not completely. 3 seconds later, he was sitting on the concrete with one arm he couldn't raise, and she was already behind the wheel, locking the doors and backing out of the space. She didn't honk. She didn't ram the pickup. She simply left. By the time Teddy reached them, both men were struggling back to their feet, and the pickup was already revving toward the exit. He didn't chase it. He turned his car around and went looking for her. It took him 20 minutes to find her. She hadn't headed toward Newport. She was parked in an empty lot behind a closed laundromat, beneath the only light pole still burning, sitting in the open doorway of her car with both feet on the asphalt. Teddy parked about 11 yards away and got out. She heard him, but didn't look up. There was a small plastic box open on her lap. She had cut away the right sleeve with scissors, cleaned the wound, and was now stitching herself with her left hand. Teddy stopped 3 steps away. He watched her hand. It wasn't shaking. Not fast, not slow. Every stitch evenly spaced as though measured with a ruler, and between each one she paused for exactly 1 breath out. She had finished 6 stitches before she finally said, "Are you standing there?" He didn't answer. "Can you hold your phone flashlight for me?" He stepped closer. He turned on the light and held it up, and he had to work harder to keep his own hand steady than she did hers. She put in 3 more stitches, then bit through the thread because the scissors were lying on her right side. She covered the wound with a bandage, pulled the torn sleeve back down, and closed the box. Then she said, "Don't call him tonight." Teddy asked, "Why?" "Because if he knows tonight, then tomorrow night he'll send people to Fall River. Then next week somebody will be carried home. And the file, miss, Marsh needs will never get found, because the whole house will be too busy fighting." She looked at him for the first time. "I've waited 3 years. I don't want to lose it over one Friday night." Teddy stood there with the light from his phone still shining in his hand. He thought about the night she had sat across from him in the wine cellar and hadn't asked him once whether she was allowed to leave. He thought about the plastic bin in her car, about the blanket folded into a perfect right angle, about Marta raising 1 finger and saying, "I counted." He thought about the name in the approved by box on the printout, 1 copy of which was locked inside the safe at his house. He turned off the flashlight. He took off his jacket and held it out to her. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask whether she was in pain. He didn't ask whether she needed a hospital. He didn't tell her she had to quit this job. He simply walked around to the back of her car, sat on the edge of the trunk, and stayed there with her beneath the streetlight until she was ready to start the engine. Then he drove in front, and she followed behind, all 28 miles back to Newport. At the gate, he got out and opened it for her, and before she drove through, he tapped lightly on the window. She lowered it. Teddy said the only thing he would say that entire evening. "I'm not calling him tonight, but tomorrow morning, I'm going to get that gate log, and I'm not stopping anymore." Then he stepped back and let her drive through. At 6 o'clock Saturday morning, Teddy was already in the server room. He didn't touch the main server. He knew everything he typed into it left a trace, and he knew who could read those traces. What he needed was somewhere else. The year before, when the technical company installed the new system, they had left a backup hard drive inside a metal cabinet in the corner of the room, the kind that ran once every night and then went dormant. No one remembered it was there. It wasn't connected to the network. Teddy plugged in a monitor and spent 40 minutes finding what he needed. The gate lock log was stored in a simple text file, 1 event per line, with the date, time, user code, and result. He scrolled down to that night. He found the line he needed and sat staring at it for a long time. 8:57 in the evening. East Gate. Opened with a personal code. The code didn't belong to the security team, didn't belong to Teddy, and didn't belong to Luca. 3 minutes after that entry, on the very next line, the gate sensor recorded the door opening a second time from the outside. At the exact moment Hope's car pulled up, Teddy printed 3 copies. He folded one and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. One he would take home and put in his own safe, and the third he tucked into the middle of the work notebook he carried with him every day. He unplugged the monitor, closed the metal cabinet, and stepped into the hallway. Barone was standing at the far end with his morning coffee. "Teddy, you're up early." "Yes. I'm checking some of the lights in the east courtyard." "Good. Better to be careful." He smiled and continued walking. Teddy greeted him and kept moving. Neither man looked back. By noon, Barone had called the technical company. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Two of their people arrived at the house, and Barone led them through a complete inspection of the system for 2 hours, openly, after notifying Luca in advance. At 3:30, he summoned the head of security and ordered every gate code changed. Every gate, including the main one, saying that after the attack, it was something they needed to do. At 4 o'clock, he had the old metal cabinet in the server room removed for disposal, along with 3 boxes of broken equipment. Teddy stood in the hallway and watched them carry it out to the truck. He said nothing. The sheet of paper remained untouched inside his jacket pocket. At 4:30, Barone knocked on the study door. Luca was sitting with the military file open in front of him. "Sir, I've had all the gate codes changed. I also had some of the old equipment in the server room disposed of. That metal cabinet was rusting through. All right, and there's something I'd like your permission for." Luca looked up. Barone rested one hand on the back of a chair but didn't sit. "For 4 days, everyone in this house has been thinking about who attacked us. I understand. But I worked for your father for 22 years, and I learned one thing from him. When we sit inside the house with all the doors closed, people outside begin telling their own stories about us." Luca closed the file. "What do you want?" "A dinner. Next Wednesday, here at the house. Nothing large. 12 people. Who? 3 people from the harbor. 2 from the truckers' union. Mr. Petrosian and his attorney." Barone paused for a beat. "And 1 new person. I've spoken with him twice since the beginning of the year, but I haven't brought him to you before." "Who?" "A pharmaceutical distributor. He has a warehouse in Warwick and 3 contracts with nursing homes in the state." Barone spoke very gently. "I know what you're thinking. I know your rule. I'm not bringing you a drug dealer. I'm bringing you a man with a federal license, refrigerated storage, trucks, and a need for transportation. You listen to him for 15 minutes. If you don't like what you hear, I'll walk him to the door and never mention him again." Luca looked at him for a long time. In his mind there was a printed sheet with a name in the approved by box, 3 camera files sitting inside a machine that no one was allowed to open, and a letter from September 3 years earlier that had never reached his hands. He thought about saying no. Then he thought about what Teddy had said that night, and what Luca himself had answered. "Let everything happen exactly the way it did yesterday." "All right," he said. "Wednesday." Barone nodded. "Thank you, sir." He reached the door, then turned back. "One more small thing. The kitchen will be short, someone to serve the table that night. Marta still can't walk." He smiled very mildly. "Miss Whitaker told me she doesn't want to sit around the house doing nothing. I thought it would only be carrying trays. Nothing strenuous." Luca sat still for 2 seconds. "Have you asked her yet?" "No. I wanted to ask you first. Then ask her. If she agrees, I have no objection." Barone lowered his head and left. He closed the door very softly, and when he reached the hallway, he stopped for a moment in front of the painting hanging there, straightened it by about 1/5 of an inch, then continued on his way. Wednesday, 7 o'clock in the evening. 12 people sat down at the long table in the main dining room. Hope had agreed to carry trays because Barone had asked her very politely, and because she had already told Luca she wasn't going to sit around doing nothing. She had been working with the kitchen staff since 4 o'clock that afternoon, and by dinner she was standing in the corner of the room near the side door, waiting for the signal, carrying things out, then withdrawing again, exactly as she'd been instructed. Luca sat at the head of the table. Barone sat to his right. Teddy stood against the wall behind them. The first course passed beneath the steady murmur of conversation about the harbor, container prices, and a lawsuit involving the truckers' union. By the main course, Barone set down his napkin and said, "Sir, allow me to introduce the man I mentioned to you last week." The man seated 4 chairs away stood. He was 44 years old, with neatly cropped hair, a straight posture, and the kind of handshake that belonged to someone who had once been taught exactly how a proper handshake should feel. "Grant Holloway," he said. "Thank you for inviting me into your home." Luca nodded and asked him to sit. Holloway spoke for exactly 15 minutes, just as promised. He talked about 3 refrigerated warehouses in Warwick, about federal licensing, about contracts with nursing homes, about transportation costs slowly killing his profit margins, and about needing a partner who understood logistics. He spoke clearly, flattered no one, and looked directly into the eyes of whoever was listening. Luca heard him out without interrupting once. When Holloway finished, Luca asked, "What did you do before this?" "I spent 16 years in the military." "What field?" Medical logistics. I handled pharmaceutical storage at the battalion level in a few places people don't like mentioning anymore. He gave a faint laugh. That's how I learned about cold chain logistics before it became fashionable. As he said that, Hope was walking from the side door toward the table, carrying a tray with 4 plates. She took 3 steps, then stopped. She didn't drop anything. She didn't make a sound. She simply stood motionless in the middle of the room, with the tray balanced in both hands. And for those 3 seconds, every sound inside her head disappeared. She had seen his signature 200 times. She had seen that rank and that name at the bottom of the 11-page report she still kept in the plastic bin at the end of the driveway. She had read it so many times that there were sentences she knew by heart, but she had never seen his face before. He hadn't testified. He hadn't been present at the hearing. He had signed the paperwork and gone home. Teddy was the first person to realize something was wrong because he was standing against the wall and could see her hands. They weren't shaking. They were gripping the edge of the tray so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. He stepped forward half a pace. Then Holloway turned his head. He looked at her. He looked for quite a while. Longer than a man would normally look at someone serving dinner. And there was no fear on his face. No confusion. Only the polite attention of someone trying to remember some minor detail. Then he smiled. "Excuse me," he said. "I have the feeling I've met you somewhere before. Where did you serve? You look very familiar." There were 12 people in the room, and no one thought there was anything strange about the question. Luca glanced over. Barone lifted his wineglass and took a sip. Hope started walking again. She covered the remaining 3 steps, set down all 4 plates in the correct order, from right to left, without misplacing a single one. Then she said in an ordinary voice, exactly the voice of a server answering a guest, "You must be thinking of someone else." "Maybe." Holloway nodded and turned back to the conversation. She picked up the empty tray and walked toward the side door. She didn't hurry. She moved at exactly the same pace she'd used when carrying the tray out. Only after the door closed behind her did she set the tray down on the kitchen counter and brace herself against the edge of the table. Teddy followed her out about a minute later. He found her standing there with both hands planted on the counter, her head lowered, and he asked quietly, "What's wrong?" She didn't answer right away. Then she asked, "What's that man's name?" "Holloway. Grant Holloway." She nodded slowly. "Have you known him long?" "Tonight is the first time I've even heard his name." "What about Mr. Barone?" Teddy frowned. "He said he's spoken with him twice since the beginning of the year." Hope looked up. "Since the beginning of the year?" "Yeah." She straightened. She wiped her hands very slowly on her apron, and Teddy noticed that by the time she did, her hands were completely steady again. "Go back inside," she said. "Don't let anyone see you standing out here with me. Tell me what's going on first." "Not now. Hope." She looked at him and said, "If I say it now, tonight, inside this house, then I'm just some girl carrying trays and pointing a finger at the boss's guest. You tell me who people are going to believe." Teddy fell silent. She picked up another tray. "I need paperwork," she said. "Same as every other time." Then she pushed through the door and carried the tray back out. Inside, Grant Holloway was laughing at a joke from one of the men with the truckers' union. Dominic Barone was pouring him more wine. And inside Hope Whitaker's mind, there was only one thought. The man who had destroyed her life 3 years ago had been walking into this house since the beginning of the year, months before she had ever set foot here for the first time. Thursday morning, Barone called Teddy into his office. On the desk lay a typed sheet of paper and a pen placed neatly beside it. "Sit down." Teddy sat. Barone pushed the paper across. "Read it." Teddy read. It was an incident statement, written in the calm language of someone accustomed to producing that kind of document, recounting the events of that night in sequence, with exact times, without a single sentence that was an outright fabrication. There were only 3 lines in the middle, 3 lines stating that the writer, Teddy Falco, had personally observed the food delivery driver approach the east gate before the time recorded by the system, and that the gate had been opened from the outside. At the bottom of the page was a blank space for a signature. Teddy set the paper down. "This isn't true. Did you read it carefully? I didn't write that she opened it. I wrote that the gate was opened from the outside. You were in the east courtyard that night. You didn't see it open from the inside, did you?" "I didn't see anything. I was on the north side." "Then that sentence isn't false." Barone folded his hands together. Teddy, I've been doing this for 22 years. I know how much weight one piece of paper can carry. This house was just invaded. The police have opened a case. Sooner or later, someone is going to ask who was responsible for security that night. If there isn't an answer, then the answer will be me. Or you. Teddy didn't touch the pen. Barone continued, his voice still as smooth as though they were discussing the weather. I hear your mother is still living in the house on Park Street in Cranston. Teddy looked up. She's still doing well, isn't she? She's fine. Good. Barone nodded. I've been paying the mortgage on that house for 8 years. Did you know that? Teddy said nothing. I'm not bringing it up because I want something in return. I'm bringing it up because I want you to understand that in this house, there are things that get taken care of without anyone ever having to ask. He pushed the pen about 1/5 of an inch closer. Sign it. Then everything goes back where it was. Teddy looked at the pen, then he picked it up. He held it in his hand for about 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, he thought about the parking lot behind the laundromat and the single light pole still burning, about her left hand putting in one stitch after another with the precision of a ruler, about what she had said to him beneath that light. He set the pen back on the desk. No, Barone's expression didn't change. He only asked, You're sure? Yes. All right. He picked up the paper, folded it in half, and placed it in a drawer. You can go. At noon that day, Barone went up to the study. Luca was standing by the window. Barone closed the door behind him and stopped about 2 steps away. Sir, I'd like permission to speak plainly for once. Go ahead, since Miss Whitaker entered this house. You've had people dig into her military record, brought a lawyer down from Providence, and now you've sent Teddy rummaging around the server room. He spoke without raising his voice at all. I'm not asking what you're looking for. That's your business. I'm only asking you one question. Luca didn't turn around. Ask it. Do you remember who stood beside you in the funeral home when your father died? Silence. You were 21. You couldn't stay on your feet. Someone had to carry you out to the car, Barone continued. That day, 6 people in this family believed you wouldn't hold that seat for more than a year. I sat down with every one of those 6 people. You never knew, because I never told you. Luca still didn't turn around. Now a food delivery girl appears, on the exact night your house is attacked, with $40,000 in her bank account, and a military document stating plainly that she stole medication. Barone stepped half a pace closer. And you choose to believe her. You choose a stranger who has been with you for 9 days, over the man who carried you out of the funeral home when your father died. He let those words remain in the room for a while. Then he said the last thing, very quietly. What would Elias think about this, Luca? Luca turned around. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward. He only looked at the man standing 2 steps away, and asked a question he himself hadn't known he was about to ask until the words came out. Dominic, 3 years ago, the file about my brother's death. Who brought it to this house? Barone didn't blink. I did. Who opened it first? I did. Who decided what was in there that I needed to see and what I didn't? Barone was silent for exactly 1 beat. Only 1. Then he said, I did that so you wouldn't have to read things no one should ever have to read about his own brother. Luca looked at him for a long time. Then he said, his voice even and low as always, Get out. Barone lowered his head and left. When the door closed, Luca stood alone in the middle of the study, and finally understood what he had been seeing for the past 9 days, but hadn't dared to name. For 3 years, the person deciding what he was allowed to know about his brother's death hadn't been the army, hadn't been the government. It had been the man who had just been standing 2 steps away from him. Barone left for Boston Saturday morning and wouldn't be back until Sunday night. Luca waited until 11 o'clock Saturday night before going downstairs. He didn't call anyone to come with him. The safe was hidden behind the wood paneling on the wall behind the desk in Barone's office, and Luca knew it was there because his own father had ordered it installed when Luca was 15 years old. He knew the combination too. Not because anyone had given it to him, because his father had set the code to Elias's birthday, and in 22 years no one had ever thought to change it. The steel door opened. Inside were 3 shelves. The top shelf held cash and several folders of ownership documents. The middle shelf held 4 hardcover ledgers. Luca took down the one on top and opened it beneath the desk lamp. He recognized the handwriting immediately, the same small, even script he'd been reading for 22 years on monthly expense reports. 3 columns. Date. quantity measured in pounds, and a column containing initials. He turned the pages. The ledger began in February of the previous year. On the 9th page, the initials G and H appeared in the name column, and from that point forward those two letters appeared on nearly every line. He turned to the last page that had writing on it. The final entry was dated 11 days earlier. He closed the ledger and set it on the desk. Then he opened the bottom shelf. Inside was a cardboard file box. He pulled it out and lifted the lid. On top were several old receipts. Beneath them was a stack of letters. He picked up the entire stack. There were about 15 envelopes of different kinds, some opened, some still sealed. He went through them one by one. When he reached the 7th, his hand stopped. It was an ordinary white envelope, the kind sold at a grocery store, slightly yellowed along the edges. The front had been handwritten in ballpoint ink, the letters slanting to the right, for the brother of Sergeant Elias Ferretti. There was no postmark because it hadn't been sent through the mail. In the lower right corner, someone had written a note in pencil, in small, even handwriting. Received September, 3 years ago. No need to send upstairs. The envelope was still sealed. Luca stood there, holding it. He didn't sit down. Very slowly, he tore open one end with his thumb and pulled out the sheet of paper inside. Both sides were covered in writing. He read beneath the desk lamp. "Dear Sir, I don't know your name. Your brother only called you my brother. I was the medic at the scene that day, and I stayed with him from the moment we got him out until the end. I'm writing because I think you have the right to know what he said, and because I know the official record won't include things like this." He was conscious for about 14 minutes. He knew what was happening. He didn't panic for a single second. The first thing he asked me was whether the two people in the back seat were all right, and I told him they were, and that was the truth. Then he asked my name. I told him my name was Hope. He smiled and said it was a good thing to have someone with a name like that in a place like this. He said it twice. Then he asked me to do 3 things. The first was to keep his wristwatch and give it to his brother. I turned it in through the proper procedure, and I hope it reached you. The second was to tell you that he didn't regret going. He said you would blame yourself, and he said you weren't allowed to do that. The third was that he asked me, did my brother eat dinner? I didn't understand what he meant, so I asked him again. He said that at home, his brother often forgot to eat dinner, that sometimes it would be 11 o'clock at night, and you would still be sitting there working, and if no one reminded you, you wouldn't eat. He asked me that 3 times during those 14 minutes. The last time he asked, he couldn't open his eyes anymore. Those were his final words. I need to write one more thing, and I rewrote this letter 4 times because I didn't know how to say it properly. I couldn't keep him alive. I did everything I was trained to do, and it wasn't enough, and I'm sorry. I know that apology means nothing to you. I'm writing it anyway because if I don't, I'll carry it with me for the rest of my life. He wasn't in pain. I promise you that. I stayed with him until the final minute. There was no signature beneath it. Only one more line, written smaller, close to the edge of the page. If there's anything else you want to know, call me. I'll answer any time. And beneath it was a phone number. Luca stood motionless beneath the desk lamp with the letter in his hand. He didn't sit down. He didn't call anyone. He read it again from the beginning, all the way through. Then once more. The clock on the wall struck midnight. He was still standing there. On the desk beside him lay the hardcover ledger with the initials G and H repeated on nearly every line, and he didn't look at it again for the rest of that night. Sunday, 6 o'clock in the evening, Barone called the house, and Teddy was the one who answered. He said he'd had Marta Kowalski picked up for a follow-up appointment in Fall River at 4 o'clock, and that she would remain there until he received the ledger from his safe. He didn't use a single word that sounded like a threat. He only said, "She's 62 years old, and her leg still hasn't healed. I sincerely hope no one makes this more complicated than it needs to be." Then he gave the address of a warehouse on the Riverside Road south of the city and said he would wait until 9 o'clock. Luca listened on speaker. When the call ended, he said to Teddy, "Get the car ready." Hope was standing in the study doorway, and she said, "I'm going." Luca turned around. "No." He said no one should make this complicated. That means if you show up, he'll know you opened the safe and read the ledger, and then Marta won't be worth anything to him anymore. She stepped into the room. "If I go, he'll think you're still afraid. He'll think you sent some girl who carries trays to run an errand." Luca said nothing. "Give me the ledger," she said. He looked at her for a very long time. Then he walked to the desk, opened a drawer, and took out a hardcover ledger. He held it in his hand and didn't give it to her right away. "There are 14 months of records in there," he said. "Enough to put both him and Holloway in federal court. If I lose it, I have nothing." "I know." She held out her hand. He placed the ledger in it. She took it and stood there for another few seconds before saying, "Let me borrow that leather document case on your shelf, the dark one." Luca nodded. She handed the real ledger back to Luca to keep it completely safe, then slipped her own small green notebook inside a dark, hardcover folder matching the exact dimensions and thickness of the ledger, tucking only the disguised decoy into the briefcase. At 8:45, Hope's car stopped in front of the warehouse. Inside, only 2 rows of lights were on, and the rest of the building lay in darkness. Marta sat on a plastic chair near the middle of the warehouse with her injured leg stretched straight out, and she looked up when she heard footsteps. Barone stood about 16 feet away from her. Grant Holloway stood beside a small truck with both hands in his pockets, and he was the first to speak. "Well, the serving girl," Barone said. "Miss Whitaker, he let you come alone?" "Yes." "Is he outside?" "No." Barone looked toward the entrance. "You understand I'm going to have someone check. Go ahead." He nodded toward a man standing near the door. The man went outside. Hope set the leather briefcase down on the concrete floor. "Marta goes first. The ledger first." "No." Barone gave her the faintest smile. "Do you know where you are?" "I do. But you also know I can stand here until morning. And you can't." He looked at her. The man came back inside and shook his head. Barone remained silent for several seconds, then jerked his chin toward Marta. 2 men helped her to her feet and escorted her toward the door. As she passed Hope, Marta grabbed her wrist tightly for a moment before continuing on. When the sound of a car door closing came from outside, Hope bent down, opened the briefcase, and took out a notebook. She placed it on the lid of a wooden crate between them. Then she stepped back twice. Barone didn't move toward it immediately. Holloway did. He picked up the notebook, turned one page, then another. He frowned. "What is this?" He turned it around for Barone to see. "Handwriting. Names. It's all names." Barone stepped forward and snatched it from him. He flipped through 3 pages in a row, and for the first 2 seconds, he didn't understand, because beneath the dark outer cover she had wrapped around it, the notebook in his hands held the worn green canvas pages with the same dimensions and thickness. He turned to page 19. He read the first line and stopped. Then he looked up, and for the first time in 11 days, his face could no longer hold on to its calm expression. "What did you give me?" Hope said. "My notebook. Where's the other one?" "It isn't here." Barone took 1 step toward her. "Do you know what you just did?" "I do." "You think you're very clever?" "No." Her voice remained perfectly ordinary. "I just think that for the past 11 days, you've never really looked closely at anything that belongs to me. You had people investigate my bank account. You read my military papers. You know how much debt I have." She looked at the notebook in his hands. "I've carried that thing past you in that house at least 20 times. Barone didn't answer. "You saw it," she said. "You just never looked at it." Outside the warehouse, an engine started, then went quiet, then 2 more. Holloway turned his head toward the door. Barone remained exactly where he was, the notebook still open in his hands, his eyes still fixed on page 19, where there was a name and a question about dinner, and he was the last person inside the warehouse to realize that the large door behind him had just opened. It all happened in about 40 seconds, and not a single shot was fired. Luca's men came in through both ends of the warehouse at the same time, and Barone's 3 men lowered their hands the moment they understood where they were standing. Teddy reached Barone first, took the notebook from his hands, and gave it back to Hope. Barone didn't resist. He simply stood there with his arms at his sides and said to Luca as he walked past, "If you'd come alone, I would have believed it. When you sent her in first, I believed that too. I'm getting old." Luca didn't answer him. He kept walking until he reached Grant Holloway beside the small truck. Holloway didn't run. He kept both hands in his pockets until Luca was 2 steps away, then slowly drew them out and said, "Mr. Ferretti, I think we can talk about this." Luca pulled out his gun and aimed it at the center of Holloway's forehead. No one in the warehouse moved. Teddy said Luca's name once. Luca didn't hear him. "You signed that report?" Luca said. 3 years ago." Holloway didn't answer. "You signed it because you needed another name standing in your place in the inventory ledger." Still no answer. Then you went home. Then you opened a company. Then you sat at my dinner table, looked her straight in the face, and asked her where she'd served. His finger tightened. Then Hope stepped between them. She didn't scream. She didn't grab his arm. She simply walked forward and stood between the barrel of the gun and the man behind her, and she said, "Look at me." He didn't. "Luca, look at me." He looked down. "If you shoot him," she said, "my name stays in that file forever. A dead man can't sign a statement." She continued, her voice still steady. "For 3 years I haven't needed anyone dead. I need a signature. I need one piece of paper where someone admits they wrote something that wasn't true. He's the only person in the world who can do that." Luca kept his arm where it was. "If you shoot him tonight, then your part is finished," she said. "But I lose my only way out." Several very long seconds passed. Then Luca lowered his hand. He didn't say another word to Holloway. He put the gun away, turned his back, and walked out through the warehouse door, and he stood alone outside in the darkness for about 10 minutes before coming back in. 3 days later, Helen Marsh sat in a conference room inside the federal building in Providence, with 2 criminal defense attorneys she'd never met before, and Luca Ferretti placed 4 hardcover ledgers, the printed gate log, and 3 unlocked camera files on the table. The prosecutor asked whether he understood that the ledgers documented transactions his own organization had participated in transporting. He said yes. The prosecutor asked whether he understood that he was placing himself inside an investigation whose direction he would have no power to control. He said yes. The prosecutor asked what he wanted in return. Luca said, "I want Grant Holloway's statement regarding a report he signed 3 years ago. Word for word. Notarized. Submitted to the Army Discharge Review Board." The prosecutor looked at him for a moment, then asked whether that was his entire request. Luca said yes. Teddy Falco received a cooperation agreement the following week. He testified about the gate log, about the backup hard drive inside the metal cabinet that had been taken away for disposal, about the prepared statement where he had picked up the pen and then put it back down, and he turned over the printed copy he had kept locked in the safe at his house in Cranston. Marta Kowalski signed her statement right in the living room while sitting in a wheeled chair, and she read every line twice before signing because she said she didn't trust paperwork she hadn't read carefully. 3 months later, a federal grand jury returned an indictment naming Dominic Barone, Grant Holloway, and Declan Ward in the same case. None of the 3 went to trial. All 3 pleaded guilty within 10 months, and Holloway was the first to sign an agreement because he had the least to lose and the most to tell. Luca paid his own price. His cooperation kept him from facing the most serious charges, but it couldn't erase an old case from when he was 32, and his lawyer told him plainly that if he wanted the agreement to remain intact, he had to take responsibility for it. He did. 14 months. He refused witness protection when it was offered and said only one thing: "If I have to change my name in order to live, then I shouldn't have done this in the first place." The evening before he reported to serve his sentence, he sat with Hope in the library, the 2 of them at opposite ends of the long room, just as they had been the first time. He said, "Miss Marsh says your case will be reviewed in March." "Yes, I won't be there." "I know," he nodded. Then he said, "You remember what I promised you, don't you?" Hope said, "I remember." He stood and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped and added one more sentence without turning around. "Eat dinner. Don't let it get to 11 o'clock. The review hearing took place on a March morning in a small room in Virginia, with no press, no audience, only 3 officers seated behind a long table, Helen Marsh and Hope Whitaker. Helen presented the evidence for 22 minutes. She submitted Grant Holloway's notarized statement, in which he admitted that he had falsified the medication dispensing records over a period of 6 weeks, and had signed the report assigning responsibility to someone he knew was innocent. She submitted the signature comparison. She submitted the medication cabinet access logs along with an explanation of how Hope's personal access code had been used. She submitted military hospital records, proving that on the 3rd of the 3 nights in question, her client had been recovering after her second skin graft surgery, and couldn't possibly have been present at a pharmaceutical storage facility more than 2,000 miles away. When Helen finished, the officer seated in the middle lowered his eyes and reread one page, then looked up and asked, "Miss Whitaker, would you like to say anything?" It was the first time in 3 years that her name had been spoken aloud in an official room, without an accusation attached to it. Hope stood. She said, "I have 31 names in a notebook. Those are 31 people I stayed with until the final minute, and one of them was Elias Ferretti, 24 years old. I managed to send 11 letters to their families before that piece of paper made people stop believing me. And I hope this board understands that what I want back isn't benefits or money. I want the right to finish writing the remaining 20 letters and have someone read them. She sat down. No one in the room spoke for about 10 seconds. The decision arrived by mail 5 weeks later. Her discharge was upgraded to honorable, effective retroactively to the exact date she had left the service. The line stating the reason for her discharge was removed entirely. 3 months later, her professional license was reinstated, and in the 4th month she received her first job offer. As for Luca Ferretti, he reported on the exact date he was ordered to, and served 14 months. As part of his plea agreement, he transferred the entire Newport estate and its surrounding land into a charitable trust named after his younger brother. And 2 years later, the property opened as a free clinic serving veterans across the state, with 3 outpatient treatment rooms and a legal records assistance department where Helen Marsh came on as an advisor. Marta Kowalski worked there as administrative manager until she retired. Teddy Falco drove medical transfer ambulances for the clinic, and he told everyone it was the first job in his life he could tell his mother about. 14 months later, on a September afternoon, Hope Whitaker parked outside the gate of a minimum security federal prison in Ayer, Massachusetts. The car was still the same old car, though the transmission had been replaced once, and the folding mattress in the back seat had been gone for a long time. On the passenger seat sat a paper bag filled with hot food. On her chest was a badge bearing her name and the word paramedic. The gate opened at 5:15. Luca walked out carrying a small cloth bag, and he stopped when he saw the car. Then he walked toward it. He didn't look at the badge. He didn't look at the paper bag on the passenger seat. He looked straight into her face. Hope opened the car door and said, "Have you eaten dinner yet?" This story leaves us with 3 very simple things. First, a piece of paper can describe a human being, but it can never have the right to decide that person's worth. Second, the kindest person who will ever enter your life may be standing right outside your gate, bringing you something, while you have never once truly looked at their face. Third, real power doesn't lie in the ability to punish someone. It lies in having the courage to correct something that was wrong, even when the price you have to pay is yourself. If tonight's story touched something inside you, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share this video so we can continue listening together to more compelling stories every day. We would truly love to know how you feel about Hope and Luca, and whether in your own real life you have ever met someone who was judged unfairly simply because of the work they were doing, or because of an old piece of paper buried in their record. Please leave a comment below. We read every line, and we genuinely want to hear the feelings that come from deep within your hearts. We wish every one of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day ahead. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next video.